All right, everybody, welcome back with Robert B. Davis II. We are going through his book, Purpose and Form, the Necessary Basis of All Ethics. And in this episode, we are going through chapter 20, which is entitled The Problem of Personified Evil. Rob, how are you doing today?
Good. How you doing?
Doing very well. Doing very well. Thank you. I think we're weather-wise, I think we're out of the ice storms. We're getting a little taste of some warmer weather, but who knows? It's February and things can still get cold.
And the groundhog saw his shadow, so
Oh, okay. That's true. So does that mean that he's got to go back in, or does that mean that he's out?
that means they say that 6 more weeks of winter is
Six more
the
weeks of winter, dag nabbit. Okay, well that would
yeah
make sense. We get a little bit of a reprieve and then back into the colder temps.
yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. Well, uh, please start us off with the chapter and let us know what is entailed within.
So this is the last chapter before the conclusion to the book, and again we're in part three of the book, which is sort of tying up or cleaning up some questions on the metaphysical front after we've established we have to move away from the modern nihilism. Here's what seems like a better bet. Now, that's part one and two, respectively. And then part three is things people still get hung up on. So we have the problem of pantheism, and we have had some objections to the Christian doctrine. Last time we talked about intolerance. Now we're talking about what I call the problem of personified evil. And that is a sort of a cultural emphasis, I would say, that we have, especially in America. And I think this one sentence from about it's a short chapter, so basically the middle of the chapter, a couple pages in, I say Christianity has become a conception of God versus the devil in cultural practice. And we'll get to it eventually, but there are some things that I disagree about with this chapter. Now, having gone through several years of exploring the Christian doctrine and developing in my own spiritual life, but I do think that sentence and that idea is still true, and that is sort of something I was trying to encapsulate and talk about in this chapter. Is that um, the way a lot of people behave, the way a lot of people talk, is about a devil who is um, supremely supremely influential. Like he's a rival to God. There's the devil and there's God, and they're sort of duking it out. And the devil's making a bunch of mishap in this world, and that's basically the source of all the problems. That is technically expressed like that, and expressed like it often is in our culture. That's technically not a Christian belief. That's more of a Zoroastrian belief. Um, the idea of equally opposed light and dark forces. Um, so it's an interesting chapter, having thought about it for a couple years now, because I think even though I disagree with my sort of mindset when I wrote it, um, I still got a lot of things right. Interestingly, now, like I look back, I'm like, oh, it's a Gettier problem. I was right for the wrong reasons almost, I was missing something. But anyhow, the point is to talk about evil and to um, address the idea that we have a role to play in evil, that evil's not just out there, someone else's responsibility, and the issues that come up with having this prevalent mythology of a personified evil character who is the head of the kingdom of darkness and is in charge of all those things, and how we sort of project and scapegoat stuff that's on us out into the devil and his works.
Yeah, there's a a lack of responsibility and potentially an air of victimhood that can come with externalizing the problem.
Hmm.
and you can negate all responsibility and say, oh, it's not, it's not me, it's that, I'm stuck because of Joe over there,
Hmm.
or the devil, or I akin it as well. I think the opposite side of that would be continuing to sin with the understanding that they will be forgiven because you believe in Christ. And so
Right.
therefore you have, an unlimited ticket to just sin as much as you want and just ask for forgiveness afterwards, and everything's fine.
Right.
It's that, okay, well, this problem and this problem and this problem is because of an external entity with horns and a pitchfork, and he's got a tail. And that's our way of conceptualizing and embodying evil. However that is manifested. I'm with you on my journey as well, in that thinking, and you touch on this quite early in the chapter, that uh, the problems can always be traced to humanity. And that's an external state scapegoat as well, of, okay, whether it's the Illuminati or it's the government or it's A, B, C, and D. There is a domino effect and you say it's humans all the way down, of trying to pinpoint who is absolutely responsible. And I think that that becomes very difficult to do because I don't think it's as orchestrated as that. I think the foundation of whatever causes people to act in a negative or evil way. One, you touch on this, as essentially the main point, I think, is that it's ignorance. And you point out as well, and this is kind of where I want to ask you. Christ on the cross said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And you point that out eloquently and honestly, is that it's ignorance, for they know not what they do. Well, it's because they're ignorant of what they should be doing. There's a gap of knowledge, a gap of wisdom, missing there. And so can you lay that blame on the individual and say, well, you haven't achieved a certain level of knowledge that would have dispelled that ignorance, and that is at your feet? Or is there something else that is causing that, which provides a space for people to act chaotically, irrationally, and erratically?
Yeah. Yeah. The ignorance point is the main thrust of the chapter. And I have some addendums to that that I'd just like to tweak and sort of uh, modify it a little bit. But we'll get to those later because I do think that, I mean, this is still true. And I think the point about, Christ on the cross didn't say, Father, forgive them. The devil made them do it. He said, forgive them. They know not what they do. They're ignorant to their actions, the source of their actions, the end of their actions. Um, and God was working through people's ignorance there and using people's ignorance to accomplish something. He even used the ignorant, according to Christian tradition, he even used the ignorance of the demons and the devil in that plan. So the idea of ignorance is really central and really unavoidable. And I think that it fits in with this idea that we've gone throughout the book of realizing the reality of infinity, because that means, like, if life is infinite, we are finite, we have finite minds, that means we are always infinitely ignorant. What it also means is that we were created ignorant. And if we've followed so far and we have accepted purpose and form, then we were purposefully created ignorant. We were not created to be all-knowing beings. We were created to be ignorant beings, not hopelessly ignorant, not forever bereft of what we're supposed to have, but we're supposed to be limited and we're supposed to be on a journey towards more. And in order to have more, you need to be lacking something. So So I think ignorance is an important point, and it brings it home to everybody because everybody's ignorant, and we're all doing things at times that are not in our best interest or not in others' best interest, and is partly due to the fact that we're just ignorant. So this is, we might say, is this is it's not the ultimate source of evil. I called it that in the chapter, and that's something that I got wrong. But it's the our ultimate vulnerability to evil. It's our openness to evil because we are blind to certain things. Um, and we have the ability to be directed in that way or used in that way or tricked in that way, whatever it is. And then on top of that, so that sounds like, oh, well, we're all ignorant, and so that's the problem. Well, that's still not it because that's not the problem. Because as I just said, we were created purposefully, intentionally, with a good purpose as ignorant beings. Ignorance is not a flaw in our creation. That's something I say in the chapter. Ignorance is not a mishap. It's not a uh, unintended consequence. It's part of who we're supposed to be. And I think that is the main thing in this chapter that is important is that flips the idea from like we're these lost, hopeless, um, ignorant beings at the mercies of the infinite and demons, and we can't help it, and we're just left alone to suffer the fate of our own ignorance and its compounding effects. No, God knew we're ignorant, knows we're ignorant, and he created us that way. He has good purpose for us, even though we're ignorant. So our ignorance is not this aberration fundamentally. So there's a lot, it's ironic because it's like, oh, we're ignorant. That people, I mean, people take the word ignorant as like an insult. Like, oh, like us bad little creatures, we're ignorant. No, no, that's just part of us being creatures. Like we're just not infinite and we're in the midst of an infinite world. So it's really, even though it's calling us ignorance, it's a hopeful view. It's like this is known, this is intended, this is accounted for. Um, but it is the part of the door that's open to problems. And to some degree, we have a responsibility, but we're not fundamentally responsible for our net, like fundamental ignorance. We will always be ignorant. We always have a part of us that is, uh, incomplete, vulnerable in that way. And that's not bad in itself. So we don't bear complete responsibility for our ignorance, nor do we bear complete responsibility for evil and the evil that comes in through our ignorance. But we do have responsibility a couple steps down the road where it's like, okay, now I'm at a place where I have to interact with my ignorance and my knowledge and the call to goodness or the call to wisdom versus the call to evil. And that's where my being and my responsibility starts to come into the picture. So um, the ignorance point is it is significant and it's foundational to our being, but it's not this sweeping dismissal and uh, pessimistic verdict on humanity. Like, oh, we're ignorant. No, like, yeah, that's just reality.
That's a this is an incredible conversation because ignorance isn't necessarily like we're saying, it's not the devil, right? The
Right.
devil or Satan is not the incarnation of ignorance. And as we've been discussing through these chapters, is an innate nature of being human is to be infallible, to stumble
To be found.
through like a blind person, or like somebody, Mr. Magoo, for instance. trying to feel their way through with the very limited level of perception we have. And one of the issues lie in is in thinking that we're smarter than we actually are, and to
Yeah.
thinking we have more perception than we actually do. And that's where then we learn to be humble as a result of that. Hopefully we have the opportunity to be humble after that. Um, but that conception of Christ saying, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do," and kind of saying that ignorance is an aspect of the root cause of why there's that suffering, and that's true. Suffering is ignorance, if I'm not mistaken.
Ignorance helps provide for suffering, or like
Yes, yeah,
brings
it
in
kind of
potential for
shows
suffering. Yeah.
right. Um, But today, see, I think of the age that we're in now, somewhat of this information age, where I think it's becoming very difficult to blame one's issues on the environment. And I say that because you can literally learn whatever you want. You know, if you're being guided in a specific direction, and this is kind of a disparity, right? Where not everybody is guided an innate guidance to seek wisdom or to seek truth. They are comfortable to bask in that ignorance. And I think there's a difference between realizing that an aspect of living is to be in ignorance versus an unwilling to seek wisdom and to saturate in that ignorance. Um, but we hear, okay, well, we can't do this and this because these opportunities weren't provided. And that was very true. That is very true in a lot of areas of the world. But now we have this. So if you have a problem with your car, you can dispel that ignorance via watching a 5-minute video on YouTube or whatever to find out how to fix that. So a lot of ignorance is dispelled through this. Do you think that that kind of plays any role in the advancement of humanity? I guess for a lack of a better question, do you think that it kind of, now that we're in this sphere of just knowledge, being able to have it all at your fingertips, you see people either going one way of um, seeking, TikTok videos all day and not learning anything, versus on the other hand, you see people that do delve in and kind of uh, are waking up to a lot of the stuff. Do you think that this, for lack of a better term, age that we're in is a catalyst to dispel a lot of the ignorance that we have? And is that a good thing?
Well, well, let me say this. One thing I realized about writing the chapter and the tack I took to it, the word ignorance is not the best term for what we're talking about, because ignorance with it carries an intellectual connotation, which is sort of what you're talking about. Like, we have the opportunity for massive input into our intellects of just information, data sorting. Um, that's maybe just slightly, maybe more than slightly. It's different than wisdom. And I would say the ignorance that I'm talking about um, isn't just intellectual. It's not about information. It includes information, but it's more than that. There's Our blindness isn't just that we haven't hooked up to Neuralink yet. Our blindness is that we have it's a spiritual blindness. We have, like, through and through, we're blind about things that have to do with our physical body and how to control and care for that. And we're blind to spiritual realities as well. So ignorance is more like um, the archetypal ignorance that we're talking about is more like um, blindness, maybe is a better word, because that's a more general term, as long as we're thinking metaphorically, not just of the literal physical vision, but some sort of blindness, some sort of
Avoid of
limitation,
knowledge. Yeah, limitation, avoid of knowledge. And I bring up,
but not just knowledge,
yeah,
because
not,
again, knowledge has that intellectual term. So,
yeah.
so that's my the reason why that's my answer to your question is yes, we have an influx of all this information, but that alone is not going to remediate our ignorance. That's only helps part of our ignorance. That helps gets us a bunch more information, but it doesn't necessarily put us on the road to wisdom and what we are lacking spiritually.
So let's say we are spiritually blind. Let's say we're not following a good path. There are certain things, and I think that we've discussed this in prior episodes. There are certain things that one can enact in their daily life, on a just on an everyday level, where they're either, let's say they're getting more sunlight, or you're doing certain things. You're starting to walk the path because you've been provided information via YouTube or any of these other things to help kind of get your body in a receptive your mind and your body in a receptive space for the potential to dissipate that blindness, right? So a lot of people, and that's kind of where I'm going. Like I know that we're not necessarily speaking of ignorance in terms of uh intellectualism or mentally, so to speak, but a lot of people that were not privy or had a certain understanding of how things worked, let's say spiritually or in other ways, as soon as they gain some sort of a perspective, or they start to change in a specific way, do you think that drives people to then dissipate that ignorance, or the inability to see or to progress, or dissipate whatever barrier is in front of them intrinsically? Do you think that then that's an entirely intrinsic job?
No, I think and this is part of the issue is the the intellectual side of the ignorance doesn't lead. The spiritual side leads. So those people who the path to healing and reconciliation can manifest itself and make use of information, but it's always going to be the spirit that's leading that process and is working through the information. So yes, there's the opportunity, and yes, people will experience that where they, oh, I got more information, and that was part of my process of change. But it's like there are plenty of people who get information put at them and they don't change, right? So there's already something within you that is primed to respond and transform based on the information. And then you better hope that you have uh, that you're not just blanketly receptive, because there's a lot of information that's going to lead you in the wrong way.
Exactly.
So you have to have that openness, that receptive, that positive desire to change, and the humility to change and to take instruction. But you also need, I mean, you need to be shepherded um, by benevolence beyond you uh, to find to encounter and respond appropriately to the appropriate information, not just uh, anything that's out there. So, um, so yeah, I don't think it's not that we have a tool at our hands and then we can perform surgery on ourselves and fix the problem. Um, the the tool is the tool is useful, but the spirit is the determining factor.
Right, right. And that, I think of it like you have that internal intrinsic flame, let's call it that, let's call it the guidance, okay? The wisdom, the Holy Spirit. Uh,
Sure.
the ability to then find things that allow for that presence to be more present too, right? Like let's say you're in complete ignorance. Let's say you've been, partying for the last decade, just leading a sinful life. And all of a sudden you're like, man, this isn't really comfortable anymore. I don't really, I'm getting a little perspective and I don't really like who I was. And I think now is a good time to change. And so that might have been an initial spark, hey, it's time to let's get on track, let's get on track. And you're like, you know what? Nah, I'm gonna keep going for a few more months. But then every time you do it, it's like nails on a chalkboard to your
Mhm.
spirit, right? Because as your body is performing this act, the witness, you know, that presence is there watching, oh wow, this is what we're doing now. We're gonna keep
Mhm.
doing this, huh?
Yeah.
Well, here's a little bit of shame, here's a little bit of guilt, and then hopefully over time you get to a point where you real and I use that, you
Sure.
loosely, there's a realization in every aspect of your being that this behavior needs to stop because it's preventing the ability to self-actualize, to do the work, to fulfill that purpose and that meaning as to why you're here. And then on top of that, on top of dissipating and kind of negating all of those things that were holding that presence from being felt, now it's like, okay, well, now that's one side of it, stopping the behaviors. The other side is, okay, what are things then that you can do to bring forth? How do you live that harmonious, that righteous life? Uh, and it is repentance. That's a huge aspect of that first. That second one, a lot of it is through prayer and meditation, through going within and uh, intrinsically becoming aware. And then the other side of that, and I think in tandem with that, is the utilization of a lot of this technology that we have at our fingertips. I mean, you don't have to go hike to the top of the Himalayas, and find the guy in the cave, who's got a beard that goes, swirls around for 100 feet. Uh, just to realize that, now you can I mean, you can find anything at the tip of your fingers is what I'm trying to say. I mean, essentially it's awareness, it's but that's besides the point. I think now would be a good opportunity to talk about some of the things that maybe have changed since you wrote the book. um and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think an aspect of that is that maybe it's not entirely humans all the way down, so to speak. Let's say maybe it's not um like we were talking earlier in the discussion here, how ignorance is somewhat of a gateway, so to speak. Um, can you kind of touch on that a little bit? Because what came to mind was when Jesus cast out Legion into the pigs, and the pigs went off the side of the cliff into the water. He wasn't dispelling blindness or ignorance. There was something else there, and that something that was dispelled, Legion, um, is malevolent in nature, right? And so where does that aspect of evil fit into the story?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a quote from Jung, and he said something like, if the devil didn't exist, we would have need to invent him. And people could interpret that multiple ways and maybe still be on the side of like, oh, he's saying the devil doesn't exist. Um, but it makes me think that just going into the world, observing things, we see it would be hard to reduce it for most people just to say all I'm seeing out there is ignorance. These things going on in the world, they're just a product of ignorance. So I think that's what started to push me, and then um, just waking up more to spiritual realities, partly through Jung and his work. But I think even just looking at it as I presented it, like, oh, ignorance is the problem. Well, it can't really be the fundamental problem because, unless you don't believe in God or a devil, then you think, oh, we're just ignorant and we're just bumping into each other and it's just sort of chaotic and there's no direction. Um, then that makes us fall into these cascading um, things that look evil. You could kind of get there that way, but then you have to not believe in God. Because if you believe in God and if you believe in God's guiding us and purposing our lives and uh, helping us and trying to teach us, then ignorance wouldn't really be a problem. And that goes back to what I was saying is like God made us beings who are going to be ignorant to some degree. That's not the fundamental problem in the world. Unless you think, God's direction, his teaching, his rule, his kingdom is just kind of crappy and like he doesn't really get through to us, then you can't really have the idea that this world exists as it does without saying there's a force that pushes in the opposite direction. Now, as I was saying at the beginning, it's important for Christians not to view this as equal and opposite forces. God is not contending valiantly with the devil. The devil is a creature under God's sovereignty. So that that changes the picture importantly. But we are in this space where we're ignorant, we're vulnerable, we're blind in some ways, and there are calls towards the path of God, but there's also calls in the opposite direction. And life has a certain pattern, a certain orientation. That's what this book is about, purpose and form. You're always going to live some way that assumes purpose and form, but you can be more or less in line with purpose and form. And there are ways of living and thinking that are actively at odds with the idea of purpose and form. And so that means there are ways that are at odds with life, goodness, God's life. So if there are those ways that are contrary to the way of goodness, well, even if we're just ignorant, as soon as we started walking down them, we're like, wait, this doesn't work. This sucks. Let's go back the good way. But there's something else. There's something pushing us in that direction, as well as something within us that naturally gravitates and flows in that direction. So it has to be more complex of a picture than just ignorance. I think the idea of it just being ignorance was a holdover from my previous mindset of that sort of secular view of the world of just like, oh, everyone's doesn't really know what's going on. We're just this sort of random chaotic being, and we ended up here, and we're just sort of bumping into each other and creating problems because we all don't understand well enough. Um, so I do think that there's a part that's partly true, that's part of the equation, but there's also the active will to go in the wrong direction. And that is demonic by definition, that is uh, the devil, you might say. Um, I still think there's that issue of the more you invest in the uh, what, fear of the devil, I guess, the respect for the devil in a way, like the idea that he's this equal contender to God, or the prince of the complete prince of this world, or whatever it is, then you fall into, like you were saying, of like blaming the devil for anything, projecting the problem outside, and that's an issue. But like going back to the Young quote, if the devil didn't exist, we would have to invent him, because it's a necessity as part of the equation once you have a view of what's um, once you've abandoned the secular view of, oh, it's just humans bonking around chaotically. Like as soon as you have a spiritual world that you're inhabiting, well, it's clearly not, we're all going easily upwards towards light all the time, even though those of us who are spiritual and have experienced that are like, that is the best thing. Like, obviously, we should do that. And then we don't do that. And it's like, okay, so there's something going on other than that, you know?
Yeah, there, and I think there are people that actively that believe in the devil and that actively seek the devil out, or perform acts, or find interests that cater towards a sinful life or a certain way of thinking. But I think the true way to come to the understanding that the devil exists is when you attempt to walk a godly path,
Mm-hmm.
because that when you are attempting to live righteously and follow Christ and picking up your cross and carrying it, I think that's when that opposition really starts to present itself, and it's not like a table. Like you can feel the table. You're like, oh, here's a table right here. Or, oh, there's a mountain over there. I can see the mountain with my eyes. I can touch the table. It's like, okay, when I am led down this path, or when I am trying to build momentum by living a righteous life, that's when the temptations, that's when the oppression starts to come in. And especially if you've already established that falling into sin and acting on these vices makes you feel bad, right? If it makes you
Right.
feel shameful or guilty, of course you don't want to feel these things, but the fact that you feel them in response to performing an act that goes against God is actually quite a good thing, because then
Yeah.
you realize, oh, okay, I shouldn't be doing this. I need to recalibrate my behavior and go back in this direction. Um, and a lot of that is through the presence of that opposition that is coming in against you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think that we have, through culture, we have identified or personified Satan or the devil as being a certain way. And so, whether, like holding a pitchfork and having the tail, or, and so that's kind of what we're expecting to see. Like if if like a strong percentage of the population does not see Jesus Christ coming down from the clouds, a white Jesus Christ, they are not doing anything. They're gonna, nope, that's not my guy. Nope, 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 nope. Right. And so it's like that's the other end, right? If you don't see a red devil with a pitchfork, you're not really paying attention. You don't realize that it's coming through all of these other forms, media, music, food, your environment, your environment. And so it's subtle.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the key word, is it's subtle. And so you can't really, when you're attempting to live a righteous life, you have to, it's like the watcher must be present at all times so that you don't fall into sin, because again, it's not like there's a door that has sin written on it and you're like, oh, I'm going to go through this.
Right.
It starts with a thought or a feeling, and then that emerges, whether it's bitterness, animosity, and so you maybe chew on that thought a little bit. Ooh, that bitterness. I don't know about that, but let's see where that goes. And then,
Mm-hmm.
a week later, you're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. And so you have to remain vigilant if you're wanting to walk that righteous, godly path, because that's when those barbs are going to start presenting themselves, and those thorns are going to come at you, and that lion's going to be coming in looking for a chink in that armor. Um, And then you'll know, like, yeah, it's not just ignorance. There's a little something else at play here. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's going through, because I think you and I were in roughly a similar state of mind in seeing that the problems are humans. But as we kind of tie back to the beginning of the discussion, if we are, I guess, vessels, hopefully for the Holy Spirit to reside in the temple, uh, then there's also the opposite. And so through ignorance and through people, through situations, through temptations, and other forms of oppositions and obstacles, that's how the adversary presents himself. And the quicker you can find out, and the quicker you have that ability to discern what is good and what is not, uh, the better things are, and the I don't want to say easier, but the truer you have the ability then to walk that straight and narrow path a little more diligently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like what you said there, through humans, through ignorance, humans are part of the equation. Ignorance is part of the equation, but there's that other part of the equation too. Um, and the, the idea that we are vulnerable and that we're here on this earth and subject to is not the right choice of words, but uh, exposed to um, the devil's workings, the adversary's workings. Um, that that brings us back to all sorts of theodicy. Well, like, why did God make us vulnerable, and why are we now in this world? And those are all important issues, but it's it's good to step. The point of this chapter is to step out, and I have, because of my movement in the ideas of evil, because I used to basically just dismiss evil on the idea of, well, it's all just sort of ignorance. Um, but I'm going to have to do a lot more sort of writing and try to lay out a full view of it. But the point of this chapter is to fight against the cultural tendency to look at the devil as this like supreme thing. That's why I said we're not subject to the devil. Actually, as Christians, we are subject to Christ. We are not subjects of the devil. That is the gospel. So to say we're subject to the devil is not a good choice of words, but we are uh, we are beyond the walls of the kingdom in the battlefield, right? We're exposed. We're so so that's true. That's part of this chapter, and then uh, now we're talking about, well, there is that other side. And you mentioned, well, it's subtle, and that reminded me of the first thing that you hear about the devil in the Garden of Eden is he's the most subtle. So,
Yeah, yeah.
like, yeah, that's it. Um, so I think that when we are living this life and we need to recognize the realities. One thing I talk about in here is that you have to start with where you are. You have to acknowledge where you are, and God meets you where you are, but you have to see and accept where you are. And I think if you're honestly looking at that, you're going through it and you're trying to figure out, like, part of accepting where you are is be like, oh, I've got an adversary.
Yeah.
Like the devil is a part of my experience here. And so that's what I've been trying to get with this update to the chapter of and that quote from Young is like, this is part of the reality that we experience. So we need to be honest about it and talk about it. Um, and then beyond that, though, and sort of tying back to the idea of the opposing, like, oh, there's God and the devil, and they're sort of equally opposed. what I think is true and I don't know, maybe not talked about enough and sort of on the side of where I used to be, but I wasn't saying it right either, is the idea that because God is sovereign, this ties into the thing. I've heard other Christians say this, where it's like, oh, we need the badness, the sorrow, the whatever, the negative side of life to understand the positive. I think that's a non-Christian doctrine. I think that is actually incompatible with Christianity. Not that I'm saying that they're at fault for saying that, because we all sort of pick up things that make sense, and that makes sense on a certain level. On our level, we tend to not be grateful for things until we've been deprived of them. We tend to not value our friends as we should or our family until we lose some of them, whatever it is. So there's an aspect of truth to that. But the Christian message is that God is good. God is not part good and part evil. God is ultimate goodness. And ultimate goodness exists beyond and without evil. Evil is subsidiary. That means that evil is relative. Evil is not absolute, goodness is absolute. So that does mean that I think that means that evil evil is relative. Evil is only seen as evil to a certain point. Um, I don't want to push too far on that. I'm not saying that needs to be a doctrine, because there's like, well, God hates evil, but I think that's because God understands our point of view and he understands what evil is doing on our point of view. So like, I don't know, there's some way of like God is beyond evil and exists out without evil, and that makes evil subsidiary and relative. I guess what I'm saying here is trying to get at it is that evil doesn't have reality in relationship to God. But if we can sit here as I did before and say evil doesn't exist, that's me saying I have God's perspective, and that's just baloney. Like I'm not God, right? So while I can have faith that God conquers evil, is sovereign over evil, and that evil has an end, it's finite in the midst of the infinite, I also need to be truthful about the fact that I am a person experiencing my life, and in my life, evil exists. So evil is as existent as I am, and I am existent, and I am significant, and my life is significant. All of our lives are significant and purposeful. Therefore, evil is part of our lives. It is a purposeful, intended, um, real experience. And so it is also real, because if we say evil isn't real, then we're like, by definition, then we would be saying we aren't real and that we have the mind of God. Just, I mean, beware if you start saying that, because you're going to come up against your ignorance, and then you're either going to have to say, oops, I'm ignorant and have been uh, speaking in the name of the Lord and all that sort of stuff, or you deny your ignorance and keep heading to steamrolling down that road of unreality. And so that's where I think I've gotten so far.
Trying to conceptualize this with our brains is quite difficult. And I think that people get really tripped up when they think of, okay, well, just like any story, you want to learn more. It's like, okay, well, there's
Right.
evil. Well, where did that come from? And if God is the ultimate, infinite, then where does evil fit into that? And so we're conceptualizing, well, if God is above, and then evil is a manifestation or a push out of the potential that God has provided in that infinity, an aspect of that allows for evil to exist. I mean, we can conceptualize it. I don't know if there's certain information with things. If you understand the source, then you can stop it, right? It's like cutting off
Right.
a snake. I don't know if that knowledge is necessarily required in this moment for people trying to walk a godly path.
Right.
Personally, I think it's the acknowledgement that it exists and the understanding to overcome it in your life. Um,
Well, and you overcome it because God overcomes it.
because God overcomes it, right?
And
And
he,
like, yeah,
yeah, and he bestows that. So it's not I need to understand the mechanisms of evil so I can conquer evil.
right.
It's, I get to live in redemption and goodness because the kingdom of redemption and goodness is infinite and conquers evil. So
Mhm.
I get to claim the authority, the, I claim citizenship, uh, what family communion in the kingdom of God because God has extended that to me.
Right.
And that's what undoes and makes evil sort of a lesser thing. And not that it's not present, not that it's not annoying, not that it's not toils, toilsome and testing and all that, but it you do have that faith that it is ultimately um, powerless.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that comes from God, not from us understanding or not understanding.
Right. Right. And we may, going back to the subtle nature of it, it may take us time to realize where that opposition is, or to realize that there is that opposition. Um, and what's interesting, is that force, that malevolent force, is present and manifested through people, you know. Um, And I think a lot of the issues that people have when they kind of externalize evil and say, okay, that evil is being personified in this individual, and that's, it's brings me back to like the Salem witch trials, right? Where people can be manipulated to believe that a certain group or demographic is inherently evil. And that's a main issue with externalizing it. It doesn't mean that that doesn't exist, but again, then you have the issue of other people placating on others' ignorance, and saying that even others are more evil, right? And so go after them. Uh, and that's why we have a lot of infighting domestically in the country, whether it's polarization between political parties, between the sexes, between ethnicities, whatever the case may be. It's like it's the externalization of evil in pointing out that somebody else or a certain group is evil, rather than understanding that it's an action or it's an embodiment, uh, that I think you have to figure out yourself. If somebody tells you and points at somebody and says, "Hey, that guy's evil," I hope that you ask, well, why do you think that? Why is that? Like, if you haven't seen an objective display of evil behavior, you shouldn't just go off because somebody says it. And I think that's a big problem that we have with externalizing it. It doesn't negate the fact that it is externalized in a lot of situations, but that's kind of a line that we're facing, and that ties back as well to the information age that we're in. Do we have the discernment? Do we need fact checkers to tell us what is correct or incorrect? Do we need big government? And that kind of I wanted to talk about this as well. And I'm sure you're familiar with the term of egregores.
Yeah.
So, and I think that we've talked about that before, and how that's kind of like a non-material entity, so to speak. So I think, when you think of a large or major corporation where where humans are involved and they're working in tandem, but it's that singular purpose of progressing that company or institution or whatever it is. It's like the government could be considered that, or a football team could be considered that, right? And if you don't align your way of thinking or your being in with theirs, if you're not resonating on the same level, right, then you're out of the club. But it's not like you're in a literal club with a door that you have to go through. It's kind of like that metaphysical club of a grouping of consciousness, of like-minded way of thinking. And I think that evil works through that as well, right? Because there's a desire for being self-sustaining, of where you don't want to be destroyed. And if let's say you're shutting down a company, is there an accumulation of energy, of mental energy or spiritual energy, or whatever type of energy that would prevent then for that singular entity of that company or whatever it is that the egregore is coming out as, to then be destroyed? Like I wonder if that is an aspect of evil that you can't necessarily see or feel or interact with our limited perception, but we can still identify it due to that nature of power that it has.
Well, so I think the idea of the devil is that centralizing spirit that tries to cap and stop with itself, right? So, like any sort of grouping that would be ruled by a spirit, if that spirit thinks I'm the end of the line and I'm out for myself and I need to preserve my own existence, then yeah, that's going to be a demonic effect. And we're recording this on Super Bowl Sunday, so that's sort of a prime example of the football team or the NFL in general. Like, if that's the be all end all, if that's your spiritual leader, like,
A lot of people, unfortunately.
yeah, you're bound for hell, not because like, oh, football's so evil and you deserve to be hit with pitchforks for liking people playing football, but it's like you are following the spiritual leadership of a finite entity, a finite spiritual purpose onto the voyage of the infinite. Like, it's not going to guide you. It can't serve that purpose. You need an infinite spirit that's integrated all the way down and that has goodness at every level and interest at every level while also accommodating for the other levels. That's the Holy Spirit. If you have these things that are these limited spirits and they don't worship what's above them and they aren't integrated with the Holy Spirit and they cap it and try to contain their power and direct their own destiny, that's something bound for destruction.
What is the effective way to, um, I guess, combat or go against or stand up against personified evil? Rob, what is that effective approach?
Yeah, so there's what looks willingly at the darkness. I have a couple other questions there. What is it that can look upon the face of the abyss and not be overcome? What is it that can fully enter this torturous game and not be converted? What can hang upon the cross and not be lost? And um, I think the answer, as cliche as it might be, the answer is love, right? It was love that was hanging on the cross, right? That gave itself to the cross for the sake of goodness. Um, what is the best player of this hardest game? Tying back to the idea of the game theory, this being a difficult game, what's the best way to play it? Well, in love. Um, and I say love itself is that which can endure all dismemberment of fully knowing and inhabiting the psyche of man. Love is the only effective approach for reaching full embodiment, full incarnation. So I'm just reading this because I think it's a um, straight to the point, and I said what I wanted to say well in those pages. So, um, And I think in this sentence, I said something more than I understood, and I've come to appreciate it more. It is only through knowing the intimate presence of love and learning to serve its mysterious purposes that we can come to see the full nature and purposes of our finite character. So that learning to serve its mysterious purposes, right? We're either serving love or we're serving what is not love, right? What's not based in love. Um, and when we sort of started out, the challenge was to intellectually consider the proposition of maybe life is infinite and to come to the conclusion that it seems like life is probably infinite. By our logic, I think it's necessarily infinite. So there's the sort of intellectual beginning to paint the picture or suppose about infinity. Maybe there's a spiritual vision of the reality of infinite existence. But those are sort of looking at and talking about. That's what you see is the infinity of existence. But what you experience in union with that is boundless love. And so the when we look at it and call it, oh, that's infinite, but the quality of it, the nature of infinite life is love. And the answer to living well in this world is to be in communion with love. I mean, that's what we're missing to whatever degree. And that's the path back to restoration and healing, and is to come into communion with that love and to serve it and be absorbed in it.
You're right. It does sound cliche. It's you're waiting for the big reveal, and then at the end, it's love, right? And so it
Mm.
might turn a lot of people off, and because well, I've heard that so many times before. You may have heard it, but have you actually understood it? I think, there's so many songs, all you need is love, love is the answer, and it truly is. It truly is. It's a reciprocal affair where if you act in a righteous way and you act in a way that is a godly way, you're walking in the footsteps of Christ, the reciprocal feeling that you feel is love. And it's such a profound, expansive, loving feeling, the feeling of love, that the word love doesn't even really do it justice. We think of Valentine's Day, we think of a big, shape of something that is supposed to represent a heart. But if I'm not mistaken, the Greeks and other languages had multiple words for different types of love, like agape, a few others of because it's not easily definable, but you can feel it, you can experience it, you can express it. And just the thought of all you need is love. Okay, well, all I need is $1 million, right? The path to experience that love, that resonance, that upliftment, in many instances, especially in today's society, can take a tremendous amount of work due to uh, baggage that we all have, and the wrongs that we felt have been done to us, and the wrongs that we remember that we've done to others, and the bitterness and the resentment, and all that stuff. And so it takes work to get from that spot to the feeling of abundance and love. It doesn't, but it does, right? It's all intrinsic work, and there's no time frame that you can put on it. There's no direct set of a roadmap to get to that point. Um, I mean, there is, but it's all intrinsic. Like you can tell somebody, hey, actually, no, I take all of that back. It's in the Bible. It's in the Bible. You
Hmm.
read the Bible, you follow this, you follow it, and eventually and hopefully through practice, you get to a point to where it's easy to unburden yourself. If you receive Christ, then you don't have to hold on to all of that stuff, and it's not so difficult to let that go. Um, but I just wanted to tie that in there with it being, it's easy to say, and it is a solution. But for a lot of people, it takes work, and that love can also be experienced through purpose and meaning. Through, if your purpose, of course, is to do, I think a lot of it is doing that intrinsic work and understanding, feeling that presence within you that's guiding you into acts of love. And a lot of times it might not feel that way, right? Like if let's say you have to cut out ice cream in order to really full, for a crazy example, right? Cut out whatever vice you want, you might not realize that cutting out a specific vice is going to enable you to experience and express love in a much more efficient way. But you can't connect those dots, but there's that presence within you that is saying, that knows, hey, you got to cut that out before you can come over here and do this. And so you're not making that connection, but there's a part of you that knows. Yeah, so love is without a doubt the answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, I was thinking when you say that, well, oh, I've heard it over here. Now you're saying it here, like whatever cliche, I've heard it before. Another thing you ask would be like, what would you rather the answer be?
Right. Yeah.
Like, is there a better answer, really? Like,
Right. What?
the answer's money, dude. Like, just take a bath in money, and that's it. That's the peak pinnacle of everything. Like, or like, what would be a better answer? That. And then I also thought, there's a guy who I listened to for a while. He was talking about, he had criticisms and people were like, well, he's just saying the same thing, teachers have been saying for thousands of years. Like Christ said it, whatever, the Buddha said it. And he was like, well, yeah, duh. Like,
Right.
if I'm not saying the same thing as them, there's a problem
Right.
because like that the truth has been known. It's not like we're here now, like, oh, this guy, guys, we've got the truth. No one else ever had the truth, but we got it. We
Right.
like that's nonsense. The truth has been there. People have known it. Like, so if we're not ending up to say the same thing, then that's a problem
That's
because it's
right.
been said before. Like, yeah, it's been said before. Yeah, for
Like,
sure.
sometimes when you hear somebody, like you've told somebody, like let's say you've told your buddy, hey, I think that this is a really cool thing, you should do it. And they're like, man, I don't know if I want to do that. But then like somebody on the interwebs or something says, hey, you should do this. And they're like, yeah, I did it, and you're like, wait a minute, but I said the same thing, but you didn't, it
Mm,
took somebody else to say it. Maybe that's the case, but I think too, yeah, it's the repetition of hearing the same answer from multiple sources that are quite reputable, if I might add, means that there must be some merit into that answer. And just because it's not, this crazy, like, could you imagine, you're climbing the mountains, the Himalayan mountains to get to that sage or that wise man in the cave, and you poke his dusty shoulder on the back and you say, hey man, what's the answer? What's the solution? And he just says, love, you know. Are you gonna be like, all right, thanks, dude, and then you just go climb down the mountain? What do you mean that's the only answer? I was expecting this, this crazy revelation, this revelatory experience where you're describing blah 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 blah. Fine, and they might have done that, but you can also condense that all the way down to love.
mm. And if you can't, there's a problem.
If you can't, there's a problem.
Um, and what was I gonna say? That reminds me of something I realized watching the first Indiana Jones movie, The Raiders of the Lost Ark. The bad archaeologist Belloc, he's like he wants the Ark of the Covenant. He's like, I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get the power of God. And I don't know how intentional it was on Spielberg or whoever came up with it, but it's such a good encapsulation of the drive to Gnosticism for one thing, but a lot of like modern attitudes toward spirituality is like this guy wanted the Ark of the Covenant, and he's like, it's a radio transmitter to God. I'm going to hear from God, and God's going to have a special message for me. And then, like, his face gets melted when he's trying to talk to God. But it's like the Ark of the Covenant contained God's message. It was the Ten Commandments.
Right? Yeah, well,
That's God's
well,
message. It's not secret. It's not hidden. It's like don't kill people, don't steal, and try to have a healthy family that worships God, that is devoted to love, right? Like that that's the message. There's no secret message. There's no the like you don't need to phone God and say, "Hey God, what do you want me really specific, me this special person? You have a special message for me." Like don't kill people, don't steal, try to have a family committed to worshiping love. That's your that's the message, and this idea of like, oh, there's a hidden message behind that I need that because I like,
it's
oh, like the message is right there. He already gave you the message. You don't need to go pry over it. And if you do and you get a special message, your face might also be melted. So there's that.
so that's a good that was a really good analogy of people that are in order to combat the ignorance, right, is to just attain as much knowledge as possible. It's like, you can read 100 books on achievement, but will that give you more ability to achieve than somebody that hasn't read or that has
Right.
read a couple? Like how much of that does it then just become repetition or the same message through different mouthpieces?
Yep.
Uh, and so if you read like you read the Ten Commandments, I read the Ten Commandments, that your ability to interpret that information on those tablets is specifically meant for you.
Right.
Specifically meant for you. It's like nobody can describe the color blue like you can. There's no real right. It's such a personal experience to get this information or to see something. It's like, and I think that turns a lot of people off too, in the sense that, well, it's knowledge that everybody knows, or that not everybody knows, but at least that everybody has been exposed to on some level, and that kind of negates or reduces the power or impact of whatever message that is. But you got to look at it like it's meant for you because you are interpreting it, you are reading it, you are ingesting whatever that message is, and you're using then that presence to discern and interpret that stimuli that message contains as it's coming in, as you're reading it. I mean, it's pretty clear, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not, these are all very clear, but the fact that you read it is very unique to you as an individual.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, Rob, is there anything else that you'd like to touch on before we conclude tonight's episode?
No, I think we were just going to talk about the next episode, the conclusion of the book, and then get a couple other announcements, right?
Yes, yes, yes. So we do have one more episode left of Purpose and Form, the necessary basis of all ethics, and that is properly titled Conclusion.
Hmm.
And then there's also an atonement that we will add in there as well. Maybe go through a couple of other things, some closing notes. And then the big question is, well, what to do after this? So we have a couple of essays that Rob has written in the past that we were actually going to fit it into a prior episode, but there was too much meat on these bones to put it as a footnote to one of our previous episodes. So I actually think that the political mantra that Rob has written, that you can actually find on his website right now, and get a little advanced understanding of it before we delve into it, is the political mantra. Probably do that in maybe 2 or 3 episodes. But first, uh, I think that we are going to then go into the art of war as our next foray into knowledge, you know, I think that the importance of this book, especially bringing it up at the end of this chapter in terms of talking about personified evil and spiritual warfare. We haven't read this book yet. We know that it is important. We know that it has been a great influence to many, many people. But I don't know if it's looked at through the lens of spiritual war, and I don't know if that's where we're going to be going with it. But um, nonetheless, there's an adversary, right? There's an opposition of some sort, and maybe there's some nuggets that we can glean from in this book, among other things that can help us along that path. So we're gonna start this and get to a certain point and fill it in with a couple of Rob's essays, and then go back into it. I don't know if we're gonna do it as a full block like we did with Rob's book, Purpose and Form. But that is our next project, is the art of war. Do you have any things to say on that, Rob?
I'm looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, everybody. Well, thank you for watching. If you've made it all the way to the end, thank you. Very grateful and appreciative of you. And I hope that you've been able to glean some insight from our discussion here tonight. Um, at the description box below, there is a link to Rob's personal website, as I previously stated. There's also a link to the Amazon. I think it's direct link to the page, yeah, to the actual book page. If you did not, if you don't, if you are not able to click on that link, you could go to Amazon.com and type in Purpose and Form Robert B. Davis II into that search bar, and the book will also pop up. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you have a great rest of your evening, or great rest of whenever it is that you're watching this. Thank you for joining us. God bless, and may peace be with you.